Okay, so welcome everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time. We may have some others joining us in the next few minutes, but welcome to the December Simulations Learning Community for Nutrition and Dietetics Educators. My name is Catherine Fake. I'm kind of putting this together, but I am the
Can you hear that? So it's the ASU.
Simulations Learning Community, or I'm sorry, the Simulations um, Committee for in-depth. And so we had just a lot of interest of people wanting to learn more about simulations and just network with other educators. And so I thought this was a great opportunity for us to come together and just share some things. So our outline for today will kind of go over the purpose of the simulations learning community. And we went over this last month, but I just wanted to recap in case some of you were missing from or were not able to join us last month. And then just to kind of go over some more data that I gathered. And then I have a call for speakers for our next meeting in January. And then we'll go ahead and introduce today's speaker. So the purpose of the simulations learning community, I thought this would be a great space and a safe space where we can share ideas and just support one another. We're all educators, and we're all looking to just incorporate more learning activities for our students, whether you're at the undergraduate or graduate level. This is a great way for us to just share our current practices, perhaps highlight some really innovative uses of simulation, like I think we'll be hearing a very innovative use of simulation today. Provide resources for each other, also to provide mentorship for those who are a little bit more experienced. And of course, just to network with each other and just learn something new. And so who are we? I shared the results of the committee roster form with you guys last month, but I've had a few people take it since then. So I wanted to give you the latest update. So far we have 54 members who have completed the roster form, but actually I've had about 75 people reach out to me who are interested in this learning community. So that's fantastic. And then I asked you, what type of dietetics program are you affiliated with? And so most of you are affiliated with the dietetic internship program or a DPD program. Some of you are affiliated with a coordinated program as well as a graduate program. And we also have representatives from a dietech program as well as the foreign dietetics education program. So I thought this was a great snapshot because it really shows that we have interest from every single accreditation group, I guess, in this learning community. So whatever program you're from, of course, you can absolutely incorporate simulation into it. And then I asked you, are you currently using simulation as an educational approach to teach your students? And the majority of you, 72% said yes, but actually there was a good bit, 28% of you that said no, that you are not incorporating simulation. So I really think this is a great opportunity for people to share what they are doing, especially to those who are not experienced in simulation, but definitely want to learn more about it. And then lastly, I asked, why are you interested in joining this committee? So the majority of you just want to learn about more resources that are available. You want to learn more ideas on how to incorporate simulation into your curriculum, network with other educators. So this was a choose all that apply one. So learn new pedagogy. And then we had about 11 people say that they want to offer expertise to new educators and then just share best practices with others. So I think we have some really great reasons for joining the simulations committee. Okay. And then lastly, before I introduce the speaker, I would like to put a call out for anybody who's interested in speaking at the next meeting. So I'll try to host monthly meetings. And so I would like to call out for a speaker for our January meeting. And so if any of you have a simulation activity you'd like to showcase, something innovative that you're doing, or just kind of your experience of how you got started, feel free to email me, and I have my email address right here. And just as a reminder, simulation can include a variety of things. It can include all the way from low level kind of simulation to like case studies, role playing in the classroom, all the way to skills lab training in an actual lab, and then all the way into an actual simulation, and that can involve IPE or not. And it can also involve low or high fidelity mannequins and standardized patients, as well as virtual reality. So if anybody has something they'd like to showcase, please feel free to email me, and we'll get you on the schedule. Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We have Nikki Beckwith. She is from Syracuse University, and she is the director of the Masters of Arts program in Nutrition Science, Master of Arts in Nutrition Science program. She's been a dietitian since 2001, and she's been at Syracuse University since 2018. She has career experience in acute and long-term care, clinical nutrition management, and food service management, and she's been a preceptor for over 13 years. Nikki is also active with her local and state organizations, as well as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So welcome, Nikki. I will go ahead and stop sharing. Let's see.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine, for the opportunity to talk with everyone today. So I think when this first group first came out, there was, I posted something about a simulation that I have done with my students and prior to becoming a program director. And I think I got about 18 emails specific to my inbox. So there was just a ton of interest in learning more about feeding simulations. And so I hope that this is fun for you. And I also hope that I can give it to you in a way that you can embrace it for wherever you're at, because sometimes it takes time to build the kind of full-blown simulation at the level that I do. So I tried to kind of scaffold it. And if you saw Catherine's email from, I think, Friday, if you wanted to make your own stuff today with us, then there was kind of a list of supplies. And if not, no big deal. But I just thought sometimes it's easier to do it in the moment. And this is also a tough time of the semester, end of the year, and everybody might be feeling a little drained. And so I hope that I can bring a little bit of fun into this. I'm going to go ahead and share. I'm going to stop throughout for questions just to make sure that I don't get too far away from that. And as Catherine said, so we are a graduate program under the Future Education Model Standards. And prior to that at Syracuse University, we had a dietetic internship. So a little bit of history about kind of how this came about. This simulation was actually not created by me. When I took my first long-term care position in 2003, the medical director conducted this with her third-year med students. It was created by the interdisciplinary team of the doctor, the medical director, the dietitian, a speech-language pathologist, and an occupational therapist. These med students, it was kind of their first opportunity to be getting out of their book work. They were doing gerontological training, and so there was a lot of kind of interprofessional education they were learning, as well as what I think was largely empathy training. And when many of them reflected after the whole year, they went back to early in the semester, or actually 2 semesters prior, and it was really memorable for them because of the hands-on kind of piece to this. And I think that's how we feel about simulation, right? When we experience it, we remember it a little bit more and in a different way. So when I came here as the internship director 7 years ago, I thought I'm going to keep doing this with my students, with my interns at the time, and we incorporated it as part of our orientation period, and now we have rolled it into the orientation period for our new graduate program. So it just was such a fun opportunity, and the students really seem to like it as well. I could probably put several slides of performance indicators, but these were two that I kept on my syllabus. I really think it's easy to see how this fits into the standards undergraduate program. And for those of you that are not in a graduate program, there's lots of ways that this can be incorporated into the standards. And actually, I use this as 2 hours of SEL. So I wanted to scaffold this in a way that felt very doable for you, where you're ready to incorporate it. So first, we're going to do a very basic sensory impairment simulation, and then we're going to add on a feeding component. And then I'm going to introduce you a little bit to how I kind of do the full-blown with adaptive feeding equipment and medical conditions added. So for the first one, just the basic sensory impairment simulation, we find that participants experience limitations of all of the senses. So sight, hearing, smell, and by limiting smell, it limits their taste, right? If we plug our nose, we can't taste anything, and also touch. And the participants can perform any activity of daily living, which could be grooming, bathing, things like that, but we focus here on feeding because we're dietitians. It does increase awareness and sensitivity of what our patients or clients experience in real life. And through that, it improves empathy. It promotes discussion among your students about dignity, which is really important to me as a long-term care dietitian, something that we always focus on in dining. And then also it leads to interventions. We naturally are problem solvers in this profession. And so when we see a problem, we wanna fix it and do it in a dignified way. And it also promotes discussion about some more practical things like tray setup, which the dietitian generally does not do in practice, but we work with the staff who does in clinical settings. And then it also is an opportunity for interprofessional education, perhaps to bring some of this knowledge forward in sharing the knowledge as well. It can be done virtually or in person. I did it virtually during COVID. It worked. It's not my favorite way to do it, but I realized that we have some all distance programs or online programs. And so I wouldn't limit yourself just because you are not able to do this in person. So what we're going to do is impair all of our senses. And we know that with aging, everybody is going to experience some impairment of their senses, and it plays into their quality of life. It plays into their level of independence. And so we're going to kind of, sit in the shoes of someone who is experiencing those, or allow your students to. And so by setting up some simulation goggles or glasses, that's how we're going to simulate vision impairments. Smell is as easy as putting some type of a clip on your nose. Hearing, we're going to put cotton balls in our ears. Taste, just by having that clip on your nose will impair your taste. And then touch, we're going to decrease sensation and dexterity just simply using some gloves and tape. So first we have to make our goggles, and this is the interactive part that I'm going to stop screen sharing in just a minute to kind of go through that with you in case you have the materials to make your own. We're going to make glaucoma goggles. So in glaucoma, patients have a loss of peripheral vision. So they have kind of that, like you're looking through binoculars that you've turned the wrong way. You don't have a good sense of what is around you, and that can really affect the meal experience. It's really easy to make most of these with dollar store safety glasses in blue painter's tape. I like the painter's tape because it's meant to be torn, and so you can kind of move it around, and it also removes from your glasses pretty easily should you want to change them up. It doesn't leave a lot of adhesive behind. We're also going to make what I think is like the reverse of glaucoma goggles. So macular degeneration is where you have your loss of central vision, but you have spared your peripheral vision. So this can easily be done with whiteout. I used initially some adhesive craft foam, which has, I bought some circles and I just put them right in there. I'm going to show you these in just a minute. We're going to create some retinopathy goggles. So in retinopathy, patients have like spotty vision. I find this to be like the easiest to kind of overcome as a person with good vision. And so you can create that kind of spotted vision with little pieces of torn painter's tape or with whiteout. Cataract goggles can be simulated with safety glasses and Vaseline. When we get to that, it's really important about the amount of Vaseline you put on there so that you create the intended kind of distracted vision. And then complete blindness goggles would be for someone with total vision loss. And again, safety glasses and painter's tape are what we're going to do here. So I'm going to stop my share so that we can see one another. If anybody is making their own, I would love for you to turn your camera on so I can kind of see how you're doing with it, and that you can ask questions and I can kind of help point you, but if not, that's okay. So the first goggles that we talked about is the glaucoma goggles. So these are, as I said, plain dollar store goggles that I bought for, you know, this purpose basically. They break a little bit because they're not super high quality, but they're easy to replace at the same time. And so these can easily be turned into these. So you can see here that I covered them completely in the blue painter's tape. You just put the tape right over it. Got my tape here. I like to take just the edge of my scissor, kind of open it up. And if you go kind of like this, you can trim right along the edge and trim off that excess blue. And then I pulled it back a little bit and I used a hole puncher. You could also just freehand cut a small circle. And so you can actually see here that there is just a small opening. So it represents an impaired vision for someone that might have glaucoma. So think of, does anybody have these that they're making them, or should I just keep kind of pretending, go through it on my own? So if you put these on, what you experience is I'm looking through little tiny holes, almost like a peephole in a door. And so if I was dining with these on, if I was trying to experience a meal and I was looking down, I would be aware of what is in front of me, but often not what is around me, right? So I have my water bottle way over here to the right. And if I was a patient in a meal situation with glaucoma, and so the importance here and how we kind of bring this forward is orienting someone to their food, or having a staff member like a nurse's aide, whoever's assisting them, maybe even in a home care setting, moving the food items to be directly in front of them because their awareness is not going to be there. It's such a simple task that goes such a long way to assist someone, because in this first simulation, our goal is to help our patients be independent. The second one that we talked about was macular degeneration goggles. So again, if you started with your plain ones, you could easily do this with some paint on whiteout. I probably wouldn't do that kind of roll on whiteout like this guy because it's not as easy to make shapes. But as I had mentioned, I had some craft foam, and these actually were already in circles, but you can buy them in sheets. There's an adhesive backing to them. And so all I did was put these centrally. And when I put these glasses on, it covers up my central field, but it leaves my peripheral field. So for someone with macular degeneration, if they look down and that plate is right in front of them, they're most likely not going to see it. And so they have to be oriented differently. They have to see that their food is on the outside of where we normally would be looking down at our plate. And they do have a bigger span of space where that can be. So think of like, if you put a plate in front of you, but you put nothing on it, and everything you actually wanted them to take or consume might be in smaller dishes or bowls that they can see peripherally as well as their cups and grab them. So again, these are your macular degeneration goggles. You can use craft foam or whiteout. I suppose you could probably cut a circle of blue painter's tape as well. And then our third one was the retinopathy goggles. So again, this is spotty vision. This is a super easy one to do. I took my plain goggles, I tore off some painter's tape, and I just made literally some little splotches all over. They're generally kind of jagged kind of edges. They're not perfect shapes in any way. You can also easily make these with using whiteout to put those little dots on there. So this to me is not as disruptive. I can more easily compensate because there isn't any part that's completely blocked. I find myself kind of looking through those, but still not a normal quote dining experience that someone might have if they had diabetic retinopathy. And then the second to last one is my plain goggles here and a little bit of Vaseline. I suppose you could probably use like A&D ointment. And I'm going to see if I can actually put this up, but all you do is take just a little teeny bit and smear it right over the goggle. I do the whole eye so that even if they have their peripheral vision, it's affected. So with a cataract, they're going to have that kind of cloudy vision. And with a cloudy vision, it makes edges hard to define. They can generally see shapes of things. They can often see color, but they can't quite see maybe where the boundary of something is. And so cataracts are so common, especially in the elderly, and they may or may not, have surgery to correct those. So this could be a temporary or one. I'm going to see if I can kind of lift it up there. Do you see how I'm cloudy through that? You can see that I have a face. You can see my red outfit. But if I was looking down at my plate, I may not be able to, find my silverware or find the edge of my plate as I'm trying to put food on my silverware. When I grab for my cup, I may knock it over in the meantime. And so again, this is to kind of, simulate those challenges that those patients go through. And then here is the toughest one of all, our total blindness goggles. Again, I started with a pair of those. I put my painter's tape, just a nice big sheet of it over here. I took my scissors and I trimmed along the edge, making sure that I am blocking all the peripheral. And this would be a blackout blindness goggle. You're seeing nothing through there. And so can people who are totally blind feed themselves? They can. Some of them have really overcome that, but this is a good opportunity to talk about individualizing the plan of care. And that's something that I love so much about what we do as dietitians, is how we don't cookie cutter anything into anybody. They can often teach us what they can do, and then we can adapt from there. So I don't think anybody probably has these with them, but the next thing I was going to pause and do is have you put something, put one of your pair of goggles on and, try to take your water bottle, or if you have a snack in front of you. So I don't think that we'll be able to do that, but it's a good time to stop and see if anybody has any questions. So in a group setting for this, what I've done with the students is you could give them each a type of a goggle, talk about those different impairments, have them gear up, as I call it, and eat or drink something. Dietetic students always have snacks and drinks with them, so that's not a difficult thing to do. And have them talk about what that experience is like. They also like to kind of pass them around. If anybody's really concerned about infection control, you could just bring a thing of Clorox wipes, but otherwise these are pretty non-invasive, so that they can try the different ones and see what that experience is like. So this is kind of your first level of bringing vision impairment into the classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And we've got our goggles there. So to simulate the rest of the sensory impairments, you can use cotton balls that I tell them to put in their ears, but not so tight that they can't hear me. Another thing that you can do is purchase one of these little kits. This is a swimmer's kit. It's made by Speedo, and you can get it at like a sporting goods store. And what comes in here is a swimmer's nose plug and earplugs. And so this is also a way that you could simulate the hearing impairment. And, I always emphasize, like, dining is a social experience, and we want our patients to dine with others, especially in a setting like a long-term care setting where that's their home, so that the meal is not an isolating piece, but it's more of something that they look forward to. But if they can't hear the people around them that are talking, whether it's their friends or the nursing staff, it can be very frustrating for them, and they will tend to dissociate. In terms of plugging the nose or blocking off the sense of smell, you can use a chip clip, you can use a clothespin. This little kit comes with this little guy, and this is a swimmer's nose plug. Nothing stumps a student than how to install or put this on. It is so funny. I've seen it all, but basically it goes over the bridge of the nose and then down like that. And so it is a pretty aggressive clip. And it will lead to the inability to smell as well as taste. So this, or any form of a clip, is a good way to impair the sense of smell and taste. And then the last thing that we're going to simulate, which I, to some degree, think is the most important, I don't know, significant, I guess is the word, is impairing the sense of sensation and also dexterity. So this is very simple. We all work near kitchens. Grab yourself a pair of gloves, or if you have a lab, and then take just some regular tape, clear tape, and put some tape around the knuckles. If you only want to do one hand, do their dominant hand. But I like to do both because grad students and interns are creative and they'll compensate and put their non-dominant hand in there to assist them. And not that that's a bad thing. We know that we have patients and they've found ways to, overcome and compensate. And we should, applaud them for it, especially if it's working for them, and recognize that what works for our patients may not align with what we recommend. And that's the same for any nutrition intervention, right? But once you have this tape and around the knuckles over the gloved hand, what you get is some stiffness. And that's what patients and residents experience when they have arthritis. So think about this stiffness and how it feels when you grab your silverware or when you grab your cup. It's going to limit the ability to do that. The gloves will also simulate some nephropathy. So my fingertips are not as sensitive as a result of this layer of latex or plastic over my fingers. And we see that so often in the elderly, especially with our diabetics. And so the ability to pick up silverware, pick up our glasses, open packages can be really significantly affected. And this is just a great, inexpensive simulation that you can do that. Does anybody have any questions about that? Has anybody tried any of this? All right. Just going to pause for a second because I tend to forget that. I don't have my chat open. Let me see if there's anything new in there. Whoop. Couple things in chat. Okay. So excited to try these. Good. I experienced something similar as a student. It was memorable. Great ideas. Great. Awesome. All right. So we're going to take it up to kind of the next level, which is adding the feeding simulation. So in the first one, you're asking your students or interns to feed themselves, right? Tell them gear up and let's go through a meal. You can ask them to bring their own snack. You can bring something for them. But I think it's important to emphasize a couple of things. One, they are young and they are strong and healthy, and they can compensate despite us trying to, have them feel this, this stimulation. And I think most importantly, that we can take these simulations off at the end of the exercise, but our patients do this every day, every minute of every day. And it doesn't just affect their mealtime, it affects everything that they do in terms of their activities of daily living. And so we don't get to experience that kind of cumulative, maybe frustration or challenge that our patients do because we, take it off and throw it aside at the end of this hour. So in this next one, we're adding a feeding simulation where a student is going to feed someone else. And so it brings in the experience of delivering dignified care, preserving autonomy. I think it improves empathy probably to a higher level than the first one, still increases awareness and sensitivity. But I also like to use this one to talk about spatial awareness, especially when we have clients and patients who have cognitive impairments or dementia or Alzheimer's disease, because we can't just walk into someone's space and assume that they are going to feel comfortable with that if they have impaired cognition. So in this one, you're going to use the same 5 sensory impairments. You can do all 5. You can do some combination, do what works for you, what's easy. But in this one, you're going to partner your students and you're only going to have one gear up at a time. So one person becomes the feeder and one person becomes the patient who's fed, and then they switch. So the feeding partner or the feeder this is a good time to talk about how we feed someone in a dignified way. We should sit down at eye level, not stand over them. We should allow them to be independent where they're able, right? We always want our patients to do as much for themselves as they can to promote that level of independence. If we're lucky enough that they're in a setting where they're getting physical therapy, occupational therapy, we should see them improve their independence over time. We should ask them what their preferences are. And not just in terms of like food preferences, maybe order of feeding, or I'll never forget one time I walked in and an aide was feeding someone and they were on a puree diet. So he had kind of a plate with like 4 little mounds of food, and the aide was pulling the spoon all the way across the plate and getting everything on one spoon. Now, maybe I'm the type of person that likes to enjoy one thing at a time, but maybe that person feeding is the one who likes to put everything on their spoon, right? We can't make those assumptions for them. And so conversing with them, not making it feel like it's a task that they're just, doing with them, thinking about what they like during the tray setup. Is there something they can do for themselves? I think of like a full patient tray, right? We might have to add sugar and creamer to the coffee. We shouldn't assume that they want that sugar and creamer. Do they like the salt and the pepper packet added on? How often should we stop to drink? Now, in long-term care, we usually say that you should offer a drink after 2 to 3 bites. And part of that is to make sure they get enough hydration. But maybe that's not how your patient, I say patient when you're stimulating this, prefers to do that. And so maybe they can hold their cup, but they need you to feed them with the spoon because of their visual impairment. The pace of eating is also different. I kind of eat like it's my job, I feel like. So I'm pretty task oriented. I sit down, I eat pretty quickly. That is not the case for everybody. Some people are very slow eaters. And in a real situation with patients, we should be considerate too that we could pose a choking issue if our pace isn't where it should be. So it's also a conversation to bring in those types of things. So again, you really don't need any new equipment from the first one. It's just a different way to do the exercise. And I'll stop there to see if there's any questions. There's anything new in the chat. All right, so we're going to take it up to third notch. And so this is the sensory impairment along with the feeding simulation, but also adding a medical condition and adaptive feeding equipment. So this is actually my current second year grad students. They look awfully happy for what I just put them through. But they had a lot of fun with it in an okay way. And this is them at the end of it. So you can see that several of them are wearing different types of goggles. You can see that they have additional adaptive feeding equipment in front of them. You can see that the first on the left here and in the back on the right, thought I had mine out. Oh, here it is. They are actually wearing a clothing protector. So this is a great opportunity to talk about in a long-term care setting, offering someone a a waterproof, it's got a water backing clothing protector. We never use the word bib. That's not a dignified term. And we always offer it to them, but never force them. This is for their benefit, not ours. You can see that a lot of them have gloves on. And you might be able to even see that on the left in the way back and in the right, kind of in the front, there's some use of ACE bandages. And those ACE bandages are simulating some limits in range of motion so that we can simulate medical conditions. And then my gentleman here in the front right, he unfortunately has simulated cervical stenosis. So he has limited range of motion of his neck as a result of surgery for that. So the C-collar works to limit that range of motion. So in a fully developed kind of simulation like this, you actually have a kit. And this is how I have my kit set up. This took me a long, long time, but basically not yet laminated, soon to be on my wish list. There is a card in there. And so in the card it says what their diagnosis is. And on the front is that equipment that makes them feel that diagnosis. And then on the back is the adaptive feeding equipment that they would be recommended to use to kind of overcome that. So in this particular one, this person has a CVA, a stroke, with hemiplegia and hemianopsia. And so to simulate the stroke, I'm going to stop sharing just so I can show you my kit here so you can see everything. So we use an ACE bandage, and we had this person have their stroke, unfortunately, so that their dominant side is affected. So I'm a lefty. You would use this to go across their body and limit their use of their dominant hand, which means that they have to eat with their non-dominant hand. Have you ever tried to eat with your non-dominant hand? If you're like strong on yours, it's terrible. But also think about brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, dressing yourself, right? So this is a good opportunity for that discussion. My stroke patient also has hemianopsia, and so this is another type of simulation goggle you can make. So their field of vision has been affected by their stroke. And so I always say, you know, this is, again, such a simple way to move their food over to this side in their field of vision, because if all of their food is over here in their field of vision, they are going to completely ignore it. And then that is the only thing that we did for this particular person. But the adaptive equipment that's in here is a scoop plate. So you can see that has a high wall on it. You put the high wall so that they're scooping into it. This helps with the acquisition of the food. It also has a little foam on the bottom, so it prevents it from sliding around. This person also has built-up silverware. This happens to be weighted built-up silverware. You can use lightweight or weighted. In the weighted, it also acts as a therapeutic component because they're building muscle as they're doing it. However, if you freshly had a stroke, you also might fatigue quickly, and so your OT may recommend a lightweight built-up silverware, which would have a lightweight foam as opposed to this heavy rubber. So far we've got our scoop dish for our stroke patient. We've got our built-up silverware. Now, unfortunately, this person also has dysphagia, so we can talk here a little bit about how dysphagia can affect adequate nutrition and hydration. But our adaptive equipment here, I actually have two different cups. If you haven't seen this, this is great. It's a nosy cup, and the nose, I'm going to turn my head, is meant to go in that cutout, and that is for the goal of keeping the chin tucked, which is a safety measure for somebody who has dysphagia, which is often associated with the stroke, so that they can drink safely without having to tip their head. These are not terribly expensive. I have a couple of medical supply companies where I purchased them from, but honestly, in a pinch, you can take a styrofoam cup and a pair of scissors and make your own. And these, unfortunately, there's no way to make these, and these are awfully expensive, probably the most expensive. This is a Proval cup, Provale. And these come in different amounts. This happens to be a 5 cc Proval cup, which it says here. And a Proval cup has a vent or a valve inside, and this valve limits the bolus that that patient can drink. And so usually this is recommended by your speech therapist, and they may be able to recommend a more liberal fluid than if they were drinking out of a cup, because the limit of the bolus makes it a safer swallow. This is not something the dietitian recommends, but if I have someone who's not drinking their thickened liquids and hydration is a real concern, I may go to the speech therapist and say, hey, have you tested a Proval cup, or have you considered it? And then they can try to incorporate that into their therapeutic recommendations. I will say the limitation of the Proval cup is that because you only get a teaspoon every time you drink, and if they have really high hydration needs, this can be challenging. And also because they have to tip every single time they want that 5 cc's. If they fatigue quickly, they may get frustrated. I often use the Proval cup for patients would put like their favorite drink in here, so they could have their favorite drink thin, and then everything else they would take thickened in a regular cup. That's the art of compromise, which our patients generally really appreciate. So that's just one example. I have a setup for 12, but if you're thinking about kind of moving into this highest level, think about what you want them to experience. Think about who you have access to, because when you develop this, you'll need that interdisciplinary team. I didn't come up with, the recommended, adaptive equipment. An occupational therapist helped us. I didn't come up with, the Provel cup idea that came from our speech therapist. And so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. Oops, I brought us back to the beginning. There we go. And what you would do here again is just assign your students a medical condition, provide the simulation of the impairments that are associated with that condition, and then assigning adaptive equipment appropriate that would promote feeding independence, which may require you to consult with an occupational therapist. And in this simulation, the students are feeding themselves. So if you take it to this level, one way that really helped me was I create those kits. I also have an inventory sheet, and I had to build my inventory over time because this adaptive feeding equipment can be expensive. I would say a couple of people reached out to me. I guess I'd have to guess and say probably $500 for my 12 ones. And then you also have to consider that some of your things are expendable, right? You're not going to reuse your gloves. You're not going to reuse cotton balls. If you're bringing food in, I tend to bring applesauce because it's allergy friendly and it's a quote normal puree food. But those are some things. So I also, in addition to my 12 kits, which I have in a large tote, I have my inventory sheet on top, and then the things that I have to bring every single time. And so another thing that I do with this is 11 of my students have medical conditions and one of them does not. So one of them has all of those 5 sensory impairments that we talked about in the first slides, and they don't get any help. And so we kind of use them like the control. And so we talk about how that person is going to experience the most kind of withdrawal from the group. And you'll see as the activity goes on and they're eating and they stop, having discussion, they don't, they struggle the most. And so they're kind of that person that hasn't yet had their, referral and consultation yet. And it's a good way to compare those that have the help and those that don't. And that's a good opportunity for discussion as well. So if you want to take it a step further, you can incorporate this with a case study. So thinking of like Parkinson's disease, because they do tend to have, patients with Parkinson's tend to have tremors that can affect their ability to feed themselves. They tend to have swallowing problems. CVA is also great. Any form of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and also just malnutrition, because the message that we used to love to send to these medical students that were still, really learning, and we had them as captive, is how this affects their ability to adequately take nutrition and hydration. So it's a great opportunity to talk about the importance of adequate nutrition and hydration and how these different medical conditions make it more challenging for them. You can pair this with empathy exercises. There's a number of them out there. You can also pair it with like a loss, dying, grieving exercise. You can do this with an interdisciplinary group. So at your college or university, if you have access to students in OT, SLP, nursing programs, or medical students, you can say, hey, and this is what I did last year. I called the speech language pathology department. I said, hey, I do this great simulation. I'd love for you students to be involved. And I did this, and the speech language pathologist did a thickening demonstration. And so we tied in all of this and added, you can see my last bullet here, IDSI. So they got a little lessoning about IDSI, food and liquid modifications. We did thickening. We actually answered questions for one another based on, what would the dietitian do here? What would the speech therapist do here? And then they also got to experience, eating pureed foods and drinking thickened liquids. And if they're out there going, ew, I wouldn't eat this. Okay, how are you going to have your patient eat this then? How are you going to, meet them halfway? How are you going to get creative to assist your patient so that they don't become malnourished and dehydrated as a result of all of these challenges? And then I always like to say, let's close that loop, right? Let's bring it all together. And so after the exercise, you could have your students complete a reflection about their experience, how they might apply it in their profession, maybe how they, how they were feeling. You can also have them complete a rotation. So maybe you did this before clinical rotations and they witnessed, their residents, their patients using adaptive equipment, needing referrals, having, sensory impairments, and then pull it in that way with their experience, both in the classroom simulation, but then in that authentic setting. You could also, I speak a lot to elderly because that's my experience, but there also are opportunities in school districts with certain outpatient clinics of maybe children or younger adults with special needs that might also be experiencing these challenges. You can ask your students to create an additional simulation. You could also use that to help build yours. And then you can also have students teach others how to do a simulation. So I know for myself that I know I understand something if I can articulate it well to others. And so it could give them that opportunity to do the same. You could also kind of tie this into like creating an in-service maybe for nursing staff, for CNAs, for, some other discipline to bring that perspective of the challenges. And that I think, I always say, be cautious of saying like, my patient's non-compliant or they just won't do it. Well, let's sit in their shoes and really see what that feels like and how that affects their meal experience that we all, I'm pretty sure, take for granted, right? Because it's easy for us. We don't experience these challenges. And that brings me to the end. So my email address is up there. And you are certainly welcome to reach out to me. Happy to answer any questions. And if it's something that you want to incorporate, I highly recommend kind of starting with that first, just doing the 5 senses impairments, having your students feed themselves, have something to eat or snack with, taking it off and having some discussion. And if that goes well for you and you feel like you want to build upon it, then you certainly can. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and see if anybody has additional questions. Thank you, Kathy. It's always nice to have your students so involved in this and have them bring back to you, how it makes more sense in their practice and being an empathetic practitioner. And I think it's easy for us to become, unaware of kind of those things. And it's just, it can be done in so many ways. And sometimes that feels non-specific. So I hope that giving you, if this wasn't specific enough and you have some questions, certainly reach out. I was reading, okay, so Teresa's saying that they had students learn the importance of feeding patients midline. They turn their heads and try to swallow when feeding each other. Yeah, sometimes I'll have them practice on me and I'll act like a confused person and make it difficult for them so that they experience kind of those real life challenges that we know our patients have. This could also be incorporated with the competency in the dietetic internship and also the graduate program standards about like doing a swallow screening and how we might observe for those different things. You could have patients be, or your students be those simulated patients. They really know what to look for if they are doing it themselves. Kinesiology students, that's great. Any suggestions on how to simulate this tremor? No, I do have like a Parkinson's kit and they have to be real good sports and kind of simulate that tremor. What I have in my Parkinson's kit to like, in terms of the adaptive equipment is I have weighted cups and utensils. And so I just bought it from one of the medical suppliers. The cup has that weight in it. And then the utensil is also weighted. So telling them that sometimes the weight of those can decrease the amplitude of the tremor. And then it also have a swivel spoon. If I could get it quickly, I would, but it has a swivelly head on it. And so if they are eating something, especially like soup or cereal, somebody with a tremor, first I have them try with a regular spoon and fake that tremor. The amount of food that gets to their mouth, if they're faking a tremor on a regular spoon, is very, very little. When they have that swivel head, it absorbs that tremor because it moves around. And so they do get more. And honestly, like, we don't want them to think like, oh, this is such cool stuff. But when they get excited about it, then they want to implement it and help. And so if nothing else, it's about the referral process that's so important as part of our field. And then also going back and doing those meal rounds and seeing if they're working. And if they're not working, go back to the team, go back to the patient. Sometimes they don't like the equipment. Sometimes they, even though it helps them as trying to create a more dignified experience, sometimes it backfires and they feel like they look different than everybody. And I work in New York State, which is very highly regulated in long-term care. Most of the standards and regulations are stricter than the federal level. But I've had a patient who chose to eat with his hands. He had neuropathy, he had visual issues, and we tried every piece of adaptive equipment. And the truth was that he wanted to eat with his hands. He didn't find that to be a dignity issue. That's how he could be independent. And all we did was care plan for it. And then we honored his preferences, and it was successful. You could incorporate, a bedside swallowing screening tool. Yep, absolutely. We did this in 2 different ways. We've been playing around with it, but it's a lot to do an adaptive or a sensory impairment, plus a feeding, plus an IDSI, plus a swallow screening tool. So I might recommend taking like 2 of those things and not all 4, because it might be just a little bit too much. We've also had some preceptors express interest in like wanting to come in and do this simulation. And even though some of them have been practicing for years, it's a nice way to kind of refresh and think about how they look at their meal rounds. And so that's something that we are thinking about doing as well. Looks like some of you are going to be writing some proposals for budgeting for these things. I don't have a specific company that I use, but if you just kind of search, medical supply companies, you can find a number of them out there. And there's a few things available on Amazon. I'm a little more skeptical. I'd rather, I guess, kind of support somebody that this is what they do, because they'll give you that customer support. I would say one of the biggest things is like, think about your setup and your cleanup as well. So I bring my empty tote and then I load all the dirty dishes in there. And then we have access to our teaching kitchens here. So I run them through the dish machine. If you don't have access to that, this can be a little bit more tricky, but having things like alcohol hand wipes are helpful. In some of the cups, you might need straws. You can see my glasses that have Vaseline all over them. Those need to be cleaned up before I put them away. The alcohol wipes can be used to sanitize the goggles and the ear plug as well. So just a couple other like little logistical things that help. Well, hang on if there's any last questions. Otherwise, I'm going to put my email back in the chat. Happy to connect with you again, and really grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you today.